the planning commission meeting. Actually, this is our work session meeting on May 6th, 2026. This evening, we're going to be going over all the details in regards to project 3.1 CUP-25-005 and project ZTA-26-001, as well as the consent agenda, and we'll also be holding a general public comment period as well. Moving on, we will have, I believe, Sheldon. Is Sheldon going to be going over project CUP, or is that going to be by you, Jim?
Probably both of us.
Okay, perfect.
A little bit. So, yeah, we had a lot of information that we delivered. I mean, we've been delivering a lot of information for a few months now on the Old Mill application. In the staff report, I'm going to go there real quick. It summarizes the schedule of items. So in March, we delivered the flood damage statement, seismic analysis, Utah seismic law and code, and then the Salt Lake County inspection report from 1996. In April last month, we delivered donations and contributions related to preservation. This packet includes proposals for use, research on preservation of historic buildings, and a seismic detail summary. So that's the information in this report. And then next month, we'll deliver materials related to maintenance, rebuilding, and renovation considerations. And then in July, the Old Mill business review, prior businesses that have been there. So unless you guys have questions, that's where we're at. We're still in a data collection phase at this point. I do want to give you an update on the RFQ that was submitted for the seismic analysis. The RFQ period closed on the 1st. We received 5 submittals, and this week are interviewing the 5 people or firms, I guess. We have 1 more tomorrow. We've interviewed 4 already. They look really promising. I think we've got a great pool to select from for that report. A couple of questions that came up today in one of our interviews is there's a pretty broad range of expertise with different firms, which is great. You know, some focus more heavily on the historic preservation side of things, while others take a little bit more practical approach where they view it through the lens of, you know, can the structure be saved, but also is there a viable economic use for the structure if it can be saved? And I guess a little bit more of a pro forma developer lens with the project. So I know that the CUP that's here now is to demolish the structure, but in selecting a group, it would be important for us to know what your priorities are with what you'd like to see from that study, and then that will help inform, you know, who we select and how we craft that assessment with them. So at a high level, I guess let me pull it up here. Well, I can find it easily, but at a high level, what the RFQ stated was that the city would like a third-party expert opinion on the current condition of the buildings and different scenarios of preserving some or all of the building and the feasibility of that. So kind of a cost analysis of different options moving forward, just so that we can really have an understanding of what's there and what would it take to preserve some or all of it. And then that would really be a first step in just assessing if it can be saved, really. After that, it would really be turned over to the private owner to say, okay, we know it can be saved, and this is about how much it would cost. Good luck. So it's really a question of how involved does the city want to be in helping that segue from the analysis to having a viable option as far as marketing and development is concerned. So one group that we spoke with said that they're pretty well versed in more of the development side of they can do all the analysis and figure out what they're working with. And then from that, they have several contacts that would be able to essentially market the building to an investor and say, hey, we've got this great structure. This is what it would take to make it worthwhile, you know, and essentially craft a business model so that if someone were to purchase or renovate the structure, they would then move right into a business that would make it profitable in the end. So anyway, a lot of information, but I guess for you all, what out of that report would be most important for you come January or February to ultimately make a recommendation to the council on what you want? And I guess with that, we're hoping to have the completed report by September 1st so that we have enough time to contemplate and review everything. So
I think what's most interesting, especially with the way that this process works and what is currently in code required for historic structures, is better understanding the overall feasibility of whether it's, preservation or, preservation has a lot of different routes that can go. You can preserve a wall, you can preserve a lot of different factors of these older buildings. But if you were to preserve this back to a paper mill, I'd imagine that would be completely illegitimate for anybody's requests or needs. So I think the adaptive reuse is probably the most interesting factor. Is what the main claims of this building is it's in disrepair and there's no foundation, so it's not structurally sound. I think what the city needs to understand is it structurally sound? It's never been condemned. So, that's an interesting factor. It's with it never being condemned. Is it structurally sound to be able to go in and do a renovation to it right now? And I think what a lot of the numbers we've been receiving from the applicant is a full preservation. And I think full preservation brings it back to what it once was. And I would make the assumption that everybody that came to those meetings, they're not expecting it to go back to what it once was. I think they're expecting it to have some type of a way to represent what Old Mill is and ensure that, it's structurally sound in certain cases, and potentially look at opportunities for there to be external funding to come in. I don't think $50 million or the 75 million that was represented, whatever those numbers in their application for them to bring it back there, is necessarily accurate. And I think that RFQ is going to allow for us to better understand that. If it is, I think that's a different situation, and I don't know what those numbers are. But our goal is to be able to understand, what it's going to take and what the feasibility behind that is, and then potentially apply tools, and that's tools for the applicant, which could be potential grants, it could be potential investors. They're not investors, but the potential stakeholders within the community, Preservation Utah being one, to be able to then have a legitimate conversation is, what is actually going to be best for the community, what is best for the applicant in this situation, and ensure that we've got all the tools ready for that and all the information ready for that. But I think one of the main gaps there is there's no foundation. And I think that's a pretty big glaring hole in what was being presented, is there's no foundation. When my understanding from, a lot of folks that spoke at that meeting is there is foundation. I think that there's now been, information that's been guided that there are foundations. It's just not the way that we create foundations today. And I think building's been preserved for many, many years. So
yeah, and it's still there. So that's something, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if my house is there in 100 years, I'd be surprised. But this is the RFQ that kind of outlines what the city's requested as part of this study. So existing structural conditions, potential stabilization strategies, feasibility considerations with possible preservation, and then an order of magnitude cost implications. And everyone that we've spoken with so far says, anything can be saved. It's just a matter of the dollars that you're willing to contribute, and really what the end use goal is, right? If you're going to make it a hotel, that's very different than if it's a mini golf course, right? There's different building codes that are triggered and seismic standards. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is a enormous decision tree of, what do we want this thing to be? And that's going to inform what its potential is. So here on the submittal requirements, well, I think that's mostly everything that we've asked for. So it sounds promising that, you know, given the city's budget for this assessment, that we'll get a pretty high level conceptual review of the current state, and then a slew of options and scenarios and different costs associated with those, that we can then use to inform a decision on the current application. So I guess any other comments, or yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, I think part of this has to be aimed at the next step in the process, which is
Right.
the council making the determination on the certificate of appropriateness.
Right.
But for our role, we have to be careful that we don't take the role as deal makers here.
Right.
We have a conditional use permit in front of us, and that's what we have to decide on. So what of this information, any of this information, is relevant to the question of whether we can or can't, or should or shouldn't grant the conditional use permit?
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting to hear from you, your perspective of what factors can be considered in that goal.
Right.
Because it's not a really broad question that's being asked of us. The city council is in a little different situation. For me, one of the most important questions is, does this building represent a significant risk to health, safety, and welfare? That to me is as important as any other question. Are we keeping up a building that puts the community at risk? I don't know if that question is really relevant to the conditional use application in front of us either.
Yeah, so I would just point everyone back to the code sections that really inform what the planning commission's role is with the CUP. So here in historic preservation, there's a conditional use permit requirement, and that any modifications have to be approved, including demolition, through conditional use. And it's not as black and white as I think we'd like it to be, because there's a lot of factors to consider with safety and other things like that. I think what this report will help demonstrate is, you know, the severity of what the structure's condition really is. You know, if it can be stabilized for a relatively small sum of money, that's worth considering, right? Is that it can be preserved and be safe. Even
It's
if
worth
it can't
considering for whom, though. I mean,
for the city generally, for the planning commission and the council.
so if it came back and said that we could stabilize the building for $200,000, what bearing does that have? And this is a sincere question, on granting or not granting a conditional use permit. But is there some way that has a bearing? And if it were more, that it would change it, or for less, it would change it the other way?
I do think it does. And here's, I appreciate your question, because I think it focuses us. If we say, if we reject the application for demolition, then as a condition for our answer, that we have a stratified list of possible scenarios for why at different price points, as we pass off this data to the city council to say, at this price point, it could be safe in this circumstance, or this circumstance, or this circumstance, which allows us to make give 4 or 5 stratified options of varying costs that result in health, safety of the public. Because I do think that if we're going to say, no, we're rejecting the demolition, we need to have some reasoning for it. And the reasoning in this case is that here's a stratified list of remedies that we think could all be acceptable for our lens as the planning authority. So that we could say, okay, based on current zoning and what the code currently says, you could do this or this or this or this or this of escalating costs. And to me, to answer your question, Jim, I think that asking them to say, listen, we want X number of possibilities, 3, 4, 5 of escalating costs based on your area of expertise. And it is going to be comparing apples and oranges, but it also means that, and this will obviously be after Lucy and I are gone likely, that you'll be able to say, okay, we've got 5 versions of apples, 5 versions of oranges, and you may have to make a decision that, okay, this, if we go with this group, these are the stratified choices that we want to, there may be some variable that they have expertise in. But I do think that we're not putting our finger on the scale as long as we're giving good information to the city council. And they rely on us for that. It's doing some of the homework and some of the legwork without saying, you must turn it into a mini golf, or you must bring it back to a full-blown paper mill. It's like, well, here's a stratified list of, possibilities.
The application is kind of inside out from the way we normally look at
Agreed,
applications.
agreed.
And so in that scenario, what we would be saying is, we think you, owner of the property, could spend $400,000 and fix the problem. And because we think you could do that, we want to prove your ability to tear it down.
Agreed.
That's totally unlike anything we ever do in the planning
I
commission.
completely understand, but we're also remedying a problem that has existed, that predated us, that we inherited, that previous planning authorities, the county, and that's why we're not gonna go into what the property owner did or didn't do at different generational changes going back to the 20s. And I just think we're in a unique circumstance, and that's why I don't worry about it being precedent setting for the city. That is like, well, we've never encountered a decision quite like this and never will encounter a decision quite like this. Well, I don't worry about the precedent, and it is inside out.
It is, it's a,
And also to add to that, a conditional use permit is typically a change of use. So is it going to be a change of use from unusable to unusable? And I think that's, kind of what we're looking at here. So it's almost like when they created this code for there to be a requirement of a conditional use permit, it doesn't seem like this is really a conditional use permit. It's more of a demolition permit. And because it's a demolition permit, and this is the way that I think that we have to kind of look at this, conditional use permit is kind of the overarching terminology behind it, but it's more of a demolition permit. And if you go to the office right now and you say, I want to demolish my home, there's going to be, 15 different steps to ensure that, hey, you can demolish your home appropriately. They're going to ask for asbestos, certificates. They're going to ask for all different types of things for the health department. And then if you don't accommodate to that, they're going to pause you and say, no, you cannot demolish your home right now. So with this, because it's in the historic and because there's only 2 historical buildings here in the city, it's a demolition permit request, but it's now triggered a CUP, which is not a change of use necessarily. It's more of we need more due diligence here, because was the protective maintenance that was done on this project, was it upheld? Was everything done in a proper manner over the last 45 years or 20 years or 10 years or 5 years? And there's a lot of things that the city has to investigate. Just like if you were to go to demolish your home, they'd investigate, have you gotten an asbestos test? That now kicks a whole new set of regulations. If you have asbestos in that, the way to tear that down, just from a protective standpoint, you've got to go and clear it out. You've got to get the hazmat group in there. You've got to do quite a bit more. This is more of an asbestos test on steroids, because it's my understanding, it is the historical designation of this site that was basically put into code, put into a lot of different factors of our city here. And I think that having a lot of eyes on this is pretty advantageous. And obviously, if the city's willing to invest in these studies, it's something that it's best for everybody to be informed on this, and ensure that we're looking at all different angles here. So
yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's really, again, having the data that's reliable, scientific, objective, and that's prepared by an expert. All the firms that replied to the RFQ, some are local, but many are national firms, that this is what they do. Historically, there's a firm that's done a ton of work for the government in DC, restoring historic structures. So this is kind of their bread and butter. So it'd be nice to have somebody here that can give us a very thorough, accurate understanding of what the structure is. And because it's a conditional use, the city does have the ability to place certain conditions on an approval, to say, you know, we'll approve demolition of this portion for these reasons, or we are gonna require that you preserve these areas for these reasons. So there's a lot of nuance with what the city's decision will be, and there's no right or wrong answer. We just have to have the information and the facts to make an informed decision.
I think it's especially true of the council. The council
Right.
really does have a demolition permit. We
Right.
still are up against the same rules that we use for conditional use permits all the time,
Right.
which is it must be granted unless they can't mitigate the harm.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, as Dan mentioned, this is a very unique application. There's only 2 structures in the city that are historic, and this is one of them. So it's unlikely that we'll have a similar request in the future, but again, I think having the study is going to be really helpful. And once we have that information, staff will review it against what our ordinances are and present that to you all as to what the study says, you know, how the planning commission should use that in their decision, and then how we move forward. So
Are there guardrails that you feel like you need from us beyond just like?
I don't think
stratifying?
so.
Is that helpful? Was that what you were looking for?
Yeah, I don't know, Sheldon, do you have any other thoughts or insights?
No, not really. Like I said, you know, a lot of this is gonna be dependent on that study, right, to really make those final decisions. Here, we're kind of speculating, like, I think everybody has a mindset right now, like, it's either tearing it down or it's gonna cost millions to fix it, right? We don't know that for certain, so it's kind of hard to make these decisions. You know,
Yeah,
reports may come back and it may put us in a position to maybe negotiate with the landowner, maybe say, preserve this, we can help you with this development or something.
And you know, that's probably where we're gonna land to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anticipating that there are other moving pieces, but to Mike's point, I do think that we do need to kind of do this in isolation. In deference to the appropriateness for the landowner to address this isolated and provide stratified solutions before any version of horse trading with anything else, any other property that the property owner has, just for the sake of being genuine in our process. And also, I don't think it'd be appropriate. And I would just encourage from a staff standpoint and the elected officials that from here on out, any ex parte communications with the property owner regarding how this goes with the contractors and what the possible outcomes will probably make for a difficult situation for you guys. Again, I'll be gone, but I would really encourage to do this really, really clean for the sake of the property owner and for the process for everybody involved. I think that goes without saying. I feel like you guys are
Yeah.
beyond reproach on that stuff, but I just want to say that into the recording that
Mhm.
this one is going to be really important to make it really, really clean for everybody.
Sure.
Also, I
Um,
wanted to let and inform that any members of the public here, if they do have comments, they can bring that up in the 6 PM business session. This is a closed session for comments, so thank you.
Outside of that, are there any, I guess, other questions you have regarding materials you received or anything else? I
Very
mean,
thorough.
I have a question
Yeah,
on this issue. I'm sort of confused as to the process. In that we have been requested by the property owner, the equity investor, to make a decision. And it sort of seems like all of a sudden we're taking a leadership position on what can or cannot be done on property that we have no equity interest in, other than that it's in the city. We're spending money when the city is facing possibly a $3 million shortfall. And shouldn't this be the owner's responsibility to come to us and tell us, this is what I would like to do, and this is what I want your support in?
Mhm.
But it seems like now the cart's in front of the horse.
Yeah.
And we are taking a leadership role here. And I'm concerned that, is that really our obligation?
Yeah,
In fact, is that within our purview of authority to do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at a very high level, what this process is you're right. The applicant has approached us, the property owner saying, you know, we want to tear the structure down. I think the city's role in that is we have procedures and standards in place for historic structures, you
Indeed.
know, just to make sure that we're not just tearing down things that are assets and valuable to the community. But really, I think the city's role in this assessment specifically is, you're right, the applicant does have the burden to provide evidence and information for the planning commission to review, which they're doing, right? We've got hundreds or maybe thousands of pages of information. This assessment is really to verify that the information they're providing is accurate and that the city is making a good choice, essentially, because you can't undo this demolition. Once it's done, it's done. So from the city's purview, it's worth it to have a third party essentially triple check what the applicant is providing to say, yes, their conclusions are valid. We agree with them. There's nothing that can be done. It should be demolished. If we get that finding, then that's a really easy decision. But if they come back and say, no, like there's a lot of things in their reports that they're providing that maybe aren't accurate or that are different, or there's new technology that can be used that would help mitigate costs. Those things we don't know. And it's difficult for us to speculate what those could be without having someone that's an expert to tell us what those are. So it's really, you know, having the applicant submit what they have, but then the city verifying that that's actually what the circumstances. Does that answer your question?
Would we take the same approach if we had a second similar set of circumstances, which I know is probably impossible, but would our approach be the same with other situations that may be similar to this? And these things sometimes have grades to them. At what point do we find a similar set of circumstances that we're going to immerse ourselves in and spend our money on? And that's probably not an answerable question.
Yeah, no,
Jim,
I think we can answer that. So I guess the short answer is there's probably not one,
Yeah,
honestly.
I'm sure
So-
that's right.
So here for the certificate of appropriateness, sorry, this is really small. Let me see if I can zoom in here. And this again is what the council would look at is, I don't know why this is not allowing me to see the whole thing, but basically it says the council may issue a certificate of appropriateness of demolition of a historic structure only after finding that all of the following conditions are met based on clear and convincing evidence presented by the applicant that is not reasonably refuted by one or more qualified experts engaged by the director. So
Submitted
that's-
by the applicant.
Well, submitted by the applicant, but that are not refuted by one or more qualified experts engaged by the city.
Yeah.
And that's where that cross check is that study is going to help verify,
Mhm.
yes, the applicant has submitted clear and convincing evidence that it must be demolished. The city has reasonably unrefuted qualified experts that have said, yes, we concur and confirm their studies. And then there's other conditions here. So
While you're
That-
there, though, I mean, it's going to be interesting to find an expert. If you look at number one, the historic
Mhm.
structure cannot be economically used if rehabilitated. How could an expert find that?
that's what the consultants we've spoken with said they could do, is that they can perform a structural analysis, come up with a cost estimate, talk to developers and say, you know, based on this, you know, you could get an ROI of this. Essentially saying, you know, if you were to restore the structure or to stabilize it and use it as a bed and breakfast or a restaurant or whatever, it would generate this much revenue and you would make money by saving it. So those are the types of things that the consultants would help us understand as part of this assessment.
If it said economically rehabilitated, that would change the nature of that question quite a bit, but.
Yeah, and I think they would answer both questions for us, is what would it cost to rehabilitate? Because having that number without someone that's willing to do it doesn't really do anyone any good. You know, it's, yeah, it can be saved for this much, but okay, well, who's going to do it? And there are some groups that say, well, we can find the people that will do it and in the end make money and make the city money. But again, at this point, it's all speculative because we don't have a report and we don't know what the outcomes are. So I guess, Commissioner, that's the answer as to why the city is interested in having this report is, again, to make sure that we're making a decision that everyone's comfortable with and that we can't look back on in the future and say, oh, maybe we should have thought a little more about it.
Sure.
It's
So I do have a question. If we go through this process and discover that the structure can be salvaged for X amount of dollars, and the owner of the property doesn't want to fork over the X amount of dollars, can we compel the owner to do that? And if we can, that seems uncomfortable.
I don't know that that's our responsibility. Our answer, we make a recommendation to the council of yes or no. And if it's no on demolition, it's backed up with a report. Then after that, if the property owner says, well, then, if I'm not gonna demolish it, then I'm gonna just sit on it, is a separate issue. The current state of the structure, that's not our purview to make a determination. So, I mean, hypothetically, they could sit on it and see if there were any negative repercussions of sitting on it and doing nothing. But I mean, that would be a decision for the applicant to see what they want to do next. Or the city council or its agents to determine
and
if the property is in sufficient disrepair that something had to happen with it. We won't be the first.
Just
Frankly, isn't it a safety hazard?
What's that?
I say currently, isn't the property a safety?
We would not be
hazard?
the ones to make that determination.
Right,
Well,
that's a concern.
Did we compel them to put the fence up around it? Because it may not
Not
be
the plan
officially
commission.
condemned, but somebody is concerned enough that they fenced it in.
Yeah,
That'd be outside of our purview.
I would think so.
But I think Jim, if you could please pull up that last document that you had. I believe section 4 of that document might answer just a little bit of the questioning there as far as disrepair and kind of looking at the different standards of what is being looked at from the council's aspect. And ultimately what the planning commission is doing right now is being able to inform the council's decision of the certificate of appropriateness.
Sure.
So with that, it's the CUP application, but then also informing the council to be able to make the right decision in this space. So if you look at section B4, the claimed hardship is not a mere reduction in the economic value of the historic structure and its host property is not caused by the owner's financial ability to rehabilitate the historic structure. It's not caused by the owner's lack of due diligence to rehabilitate the historic structure and is not caused by any other self-imposed condition. Specifically section 19.86.045. So the neglect, I think, is a major component that is being observed. And I think that a lot of that is, understanding, and that's what came out of that commission meeting that we had, is right now there is an ordinance in the city that is that 19.86.045 that is a requirement for a structure like this to be upkept from a safety standpoint. Now, what was claimed in that meeting, in the commission meeting back in February or January, is that it has been in this current state since roughly 83, when the floods of 83 happened. And there's been other uses there throughout that whole period of time. Under the current code, right now, from our observation, and I don't know if the city has made any formal observations of this at this point, which Jim, you could potentially enlighten us on this. If it's in a state of disrepair or certain things outside of and breach of that 19.86.045, there's hefty repercussions from that. So I think that those are all things that need to be observed in this appropriateness here, as well as all the additional details that we need to just better understand as a city to then say, hey, yes, tear this thing down. Like this thing, let's put a nice plaque up there. Let's maybe reuse some things, or what? There's certain ways and there's certain mechanisms that it's not appropriate for us to do this. So I think those are the two areas, there's the appropriateness and then there's, some of the things that, hey, this is appropriate to do. And we're in that due diligence phase right now. And that's why it's a year long. And that's just kind of looking at the whole way that the code's written here. a year to do a lot of due diligence and, you know, the amount of manpower it takes to engineer and look at the right groups, you know, there's only 4 or 5 groups probably in the Intermountain West that would have the experience to do something like this. So I think at the end of the day, there's 2 of these in the city. And I don't know if the city, when they were writing the ordinance, understood that this would ever be something that they're gonna discuss. I'm sure Commissioner Shelton would have some additional light to that. But due diligence is important. And I think, you know, this is an important structure for us to do that due diligence on.
Yeah, so I guess for now, I know we've got one more thing on the agenda, but for now, I would just say, try not to draw conclusions. You know, there's a lot of information that's not here yet that will be really important for us. And as we get that information and as we get closer to the end of the year, staff will do a much better job of differentiating what the planning commission's role is in this decision versus the council, because it is 2 different hats and 2 different review criteria. You know, the council's burdened with the final say, but also their review criteria includes, you know, the economic impacts of that. That's not something really the planning commission can use as a determining factor. But we'll parse that out as we get the information, just so everyone's clear on that. So anyways, we're moving forward. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot that's been done already, but we'll keep you informed as we go. And then I guess just lastly, we do have this on the business agenda for tonight. In the business meeting, we can talk about, you know, when you feel it's appropriate to put it back on the business meeting. You know, similar to last time, you all continued the item to a future date. So if you just want to be thinking about what that date is, I honestly don't know if there's benefit in having another public hearing until we really have all the information together.
Yeah.
Because until then, we're just speculating and trying to guess, and no one knows.
When will you
So-
be deciding on the contractor for the RFQ?
First thing next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it might be worthwhile for us to at least have it on our work session in next meeting to just go over, you know, the RFQ proposal, so we can just better understand that and just see where that alignment with their scope to what our purview is. Just so we can keep that at least active on our work session. And then, you know, after we get the proposal back, I would assume that we would probably want to put it back out to a hearing, public hearing, maybe in October.
What's the deadline for the RFQ?
Uh,
It's a deadline for them to complete the,
September 1st is when we've requested they have everything done.
great. So as soon as planning commission after that, I would recommend.
Yeah, and we'll need time to review it as well.
And probably
But
present it to us.
yeah, and we've asked the consultants to include in their scope a presentation to the planning commission of their findings. I guess it's really a matter of when you want that. If you want that in December, January, after we've digested everything, or in September or October, when we have it fresh off the press.
Sewer's probably
I would say early.
Okay,
Historically, when there's a delay, that just breeds challenges for you guys. So
Sure.
the sooner you can get it to the planning commission,
okay.
it'll be better off for everybody.
Yeah, and I agree. I would recommend just keeping it as a standing work session item, because we still have material that we're gonna be delivering every meeting, so.
So in terms of process for the business session, this item is not open to public comment.
Not until we advertise it to be. I mean, we held the initial.
I think it's
public hearing.
misleading a lot of times when things are on the business session agenda. You know what I mean? I mean, that it gives the appearance that it's
Mhm.
something else. So it won't be opened up for public comment.
Well, it will be general public
Would
comment.
take
General
general.
public
And I can
comment, but not
clarify that
as
today.
not as an agenda.
Making sure if somebody shows up today, I mean, I frankly think it's one of the reasons that we kept it open for so long. I would love for a little sprinkling of that throughout the year, you know, for that reason, you know, but rather than,
Mhm.
you know, we get 100 people and we have to listen to the same thing 3 times or something like that, or 5 times or whatever. I think sprinkling it has been really just
Yeah.
identically good.
And just to clarify the process with the public hearing, so generally, we would send a mailed notice to everyone within 300 feet that, hey, we're holding a public hearing on this day for this application. It can be frustrating for the public to get a letter and then show up at a meeting where we don't really have any information or decisions
Exactly.
that are made. it was important in January to hold that, just to make everyone aware this is happening. But until the public can meaningfully weigh in on something, I would recommend not doing a public
Mhm.
hearing. We can certainly accept public comment, and people can email or call anytime and we'll talk to them. But just for the sake of meeting operations, it would be better to not frustrate the public because they show up and they're like, really, you guys don't even have anything.
Sure.
for it." So,
Sure.
so October then, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think October is going to be the best.
So do you want to wait to have it on the business agenda until then? Because you would essentially make a motion tonight to continue this item to October, whatever, and then it would resurface on the business meeting, but we would keep it on the work session
Yeah, if
every
we can
meeting
have
until then.
work session review of the request for qualification
Yeah, we can review all that stuff.
and
whenever.
have that in the next meeting and then
Sure.
push out till October to put it back on the business meeting and
Okay.
you know, just into perpetuity for the work session.
So would October
Would
be the
be
date that
October
the,
7th.
that the engineer presents it in October to the planning commission?
I think that'd be.
Their findings?
advantageous, Yeah.
Yeah, or September 2nd. I
I
mean,
mean, if they could do
If
it
we
on.
do
in
September first, let's get it September 2nd, so we're all.
Because it would make
together.
more sense to present in September and have the public hearing in October.
yeah, we can ask them, and we don't have a contract yet, but we can tell them, you know, be ready to present September 2nd. And if we need to adjust it, we can. But that's a good target.
Would we think we would do another public hearing on the date or near the date where we make a decision?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Probably a
that'd be
couple,
wise.
depending on where things land, right? So I would say at least one more, maybe two.
So
It
October.
really depends on where we're coming together on a decision and what meaningful feedback we think we could get from the public.
And to that exact argument too, even though there's some brain damage and some effort on staff part, I mean,
And expense.
and expense, but
Notify.
I'll tell you, if we're asking the public what they think, we need to be willing to pivot a little bit and listen and respond appropriately and not just say, oh, you were heard, and then we're just gonna make a decision in a vacuum. I don't think that's wise.
Yeah, well, and it's equally important to inform the public of what we have in front of us, right? So this is what we've heard so far, and that's why I think having the consultants here to present information is that it's, again, objective, unbiased, scientific information, and if the public is educated and understanding what you all are having to grapple with, that will inform their feedback. Because it's an emotional topic, people are gonna get emotional, but it's generally better if comments are guided with data
Absolutely.
than emotion. So anyway, we'll aim for September 2nd then, if that's what everyone thinks is.
For the presentation and then
Yeah.
October for a hearing, and then the year deadline, is it January or February? I'm sorry.
The end of January.
End of January.
Yeah, and I don't know when a hearing would be necessary. I mean, I guess after September, we can talk about what we think. I mean,
Because that gives you
we'll-
time to do.
Yeah, we'll
notice.
have a few months. I would just be hesitant to hold a hearing until we have everything in front of us and a report people can read and come prepared to the meeting to make whatever comment they'd like to make.
I think that's a good direction.
So, okay. Right on.
So propose September 2nd for the review and then October meeting for the hearing.
Well, maybe October, I don't
Maybe.
know. I mean, sometime after September, we could do a hearing.
And that, I don't think that will have to be in the motion today.
No,
You think, Chair? I mean, we could, I mean, give you guys some discretion and once the report comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, if they missed the mark and you guys need it, or they need to repackage it, it may be wise to give them some time.
So the motion tonight is to continue it on the work session agenda. That
well,
is-
to continue it to September 2nd for the business meeting, but to have a standing work session item until then. Yeah. And if September rolls around and we're not ready, we can continue it again, October or whatever.
Perfect. Before we move on to project ZTA 26-001, do you guys want to grab food, eat while they're presenting, and then we'll go over into the work session after presentation? Are you guys comfortable with that?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Wonderful. Grab some food.
Are we officially adjourning?
No, just
Oh,
quick.
okay.
Grab a food, quick 4-minute break.
Yes? The call, they don't need to hear. Recording doesn't need to be the planning commission getting their food.
You could always do an advertisement.
Everybody, welcome.
This is who's providing the, this is the menu.
Get on to Sydney's podcast. How's everybody doing? They can't use any, no decisions will be made till.
Yeah, we want everyone to.
I enjoy music.
Logical.
What do you have in mind? Summer Haze?
Yes.
That's okay. It's really fine. I don't mind.
What?
Yeah, and that's why I just. wanted
You're the
to
best, Matt.
If you're interested in exploring that, I'll introduce you.
Whatever.
Now the city.
So it doesn't involve me doing demos. With it.
Separate from.
I don't have to bring my cameras.
Second.
Yeah.
Just like geotech.
You know, I welcome more information. I feel like I'm juggling
Good to see you.
nothing very heavy.
So.
A little bit of, well, I do a lot of babysitting.
Oh, okay.
And that is the.
You'll have that. But then this and the help with the heights and like trying to develop.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So none of it's all-
How are you? Good. Yeah. But yeah, send me
You're
information.
going with the cost savings.
I can't eat them for the-
It's just not a pretty sight.
It's just this.
Well, that's why we're stepping in. It's like, let's get another opinion.
But you do the same thing on the geotech.
Geotech stuff we do, so that's a safety, there's big implications for that stuff.
Yeah.
Those are the only two areas that we do that.
Yeah, and I'm not volunteer, I'm what I have to do. Well, it-
Yeah,
really-
yeah. Right. It is. It is, yeah. Okay.
Thank you guys for the food.
Yes. The spectators are all like, you're looking good out there.
Apply to be on the planning commission.
Oh, yeah, you can do it. They've got some open spots right now.
You work for food, it's a pretty good gig.
Yeah.
Oh, they might make the time request. All? Oh, just on my dad. Fantastic, good to see you. Good to see you.
All right.
Great, I'm gonna go. That you?
I'll make the
Was it
screen.
Colin Heights, like soccer? Like kids were playing soccer
Yeah.
on Saturday? Alright.
Yeah,
Thought that was you. Yeah.
All right, I think we are ready to move over onto project ZTA 26-001.
All right, okay, we'll be talking about some second utility meters for your entertainment today. Okay, so this is a resident initiated request by Nash Williams for a zoning text amendment to update the city code. There's two sections that he's proposing to update, chapter 19.75 and 19.76. The proposed amendment would allow second utility meters for guest houses and detached accessory dwelling units in cases where the existing utilities can't be adequately sized or where upgrades would be unreasonable, while also requiring that the primary residents remain responsible for billing associated with both meters for the ADUs. So under the existing code, section 19.75.050 prohibits the installation of separate utility meters for ADUs. Similarly, 19.76.030 prohibits separate utilities for guest houses. But over the past year, staff has received feedback from not only Nash Williams, but actually multiple residents that the code has been overly restrictive, especially when physical site conditions or infrastructure limitations make connecting to the primary structure's utility meter impractical. This can also create, unnecessary financial and logistical burdens for residents. So there is a precedent in Salt Lake County. This is an excerpt from their code. So they do not allow internal ADUs to be separately metered, but they do allow detached ADUs to be separately metered as long as the property owner is billed for both. The project that created, this text amendment is Nash Williams. He's in the process of designing a casita, so a kind of a detached accessory structure at 3396 East Antler Way. The proposed location of his casita is approximately 194 feet from his power meter and 123 feet from his gas meter. However, the power nearest to the proposed casita is actually only 3 feet from the northeast corner of the property. So on the opposite side, there's ways to connect to power, but only 3 feet versus almost 200 feet. You can see from this picture that he included, it's a little hard to tell in here, the kind of in the front of the picture, you can see the red circle around his utility box. And then if you look kind of near, there's a white truck in the background. Past that white truck is where the proposed casita would be. So that's where the power would have to run to. He's reached out to utility companies. You can see that more in the narrative that's attached to the staff report. But Rocky Mountain Power and Enbridge Gas have both recommended that a second meter would make most sense in the situation. It would greatly reduce impacts to existing infrastructure and landscaping, and it would save thousands of dollars because you wouldn't have to rip out. There's a heated driveway. Obviously, you can see there's a lot of mature trees, some grading, significant grading right here, and other landscaping that would be impacted if you were to run utility meters across the entire property. And then here's just a little aerial view site plan. You can see the red star shows the existing power meter for reference. There's the existing home and then the proposed casita all the way on the other side of the property. So we've also included the current code and then the proposed code. We've altered it just a little bit from how Nash Williams originally proposed it. We sent it to Shane, the city attorney, and he made some small recommendations, but it should still show the same purpose, I guess. So originally in 1975-050 said the installation of separate utility meters for an ADU is prohibited. The proposed version would say the installation of separate utility meters for an ADU is prohibited unless it can be demonstrated by the applicant with supporting documentation from the applicable utility provider that the existing utilities cannot be adequately sized for the ADU, or that bifurcation from the principal residence cannot be reasonably achieved. In such cases, the property owner must be billed for both meters. Similarly, 1976-030 says installation of separate utility meters for the guest house is prohibited. We have basically the same proposed addition. It just doesn't also include the portion requiring billing from the resident, just because it would just be a guest house. So there would not be a second person renting out a guest house, I guess. We didn't receive any public comments. And then staff recommends that the planning commission forward a recommendation of approval to city council for the proposed changes. We found that the text amendment maintains the original intent of the code to maintain the functional and financial integration of accessory dwelling units or guest houses at the primary residence, while still allowing flexibility for extenuating circumstances.
What did you say the original intent of the code was?
Just to provide, like an integration where the accessory dwelling units are seen as accessory to a home, so you don't want it to be viewed as a total separate entity. So if they're financially connected to the main home, and then they're functionally connected to the main home as well. So.
And did you mention that this is already an approved ADU?
He's going through the process right now. So it's this current project. Yeah, he's going through the process of either making it a guest house or ADU. I think it's seems like it's making sure that it could be an ADU. So he's making sure the setbacks will meet ADU standards if he decides.
What's our definition in the code of the difference between a guest house versus an ADU?
Yeah, and the ADU would be rented specifically to a separate household. Guest house, there wouldn't be that rental aspect. And typically it is just gonna be for a shorter time, like a mother-in-law suite, I guess would fall.
Is that a deed restriction as far as who's the body that manages compliance on that.
For an accessory dwelling unit?
No, for determining if it's a guest, because it sounds like it's the exact same structure and physical space.
Yeah. It-
So,
Yeah, basically, if they wanted to rent it out, it would require a separate application with the city, and they have to have a signed affidavit recorded with the county as well. I mean, like, yeah,
There's separate permit and licensing required for an ADU in a guest house. So if someone builds a guest house and is using it as an ADU, code enforcement essentially would be the group, because we would have on file that it's not an ADU.
Yeah.
Um,
we have a record of all the approved ADUs in the city.
okay,
Will you spin back to the language for the ADU? So this will seem like me, I guess, it'll seem radical, but if in this long list of extenuating circumstances, this is permitted, to me, I think you could get rid of a lot of planning staff work if you said instead, the installation of separate utility meters for an ADU is permitted. The property owner must be billed for both meters. End of the language. Why make people come and you guys wade through all of these, does it meet these 40 criteria? If there's not really any significant benefit to just
Have it be separate.
let them do it.
Yeah, I see, that's what my thought was as well, because what if someone does have these extenuating circumstances, then do they have to submit some criteria and then you guys have to review it, or does it come to the planning commission? I mean, I thought that same thing, is if we're gonna allow it, let's allow it.
What are the harms in having two meters?
Yeah, I guess some of the complications might be, addressing. So I think the intent behind having it be 1 meter generally is that it doesn't appear to be a duplex, right? Especially for an internal ADU, where now if you have 2 meters, potentially 2 addresses, that looks a lot to me like a duplex, which wouldn't comply with the single family zone. But like an ADU kind of is a duplex, but it's not, because it's accessory to the bigger house. So there's a lot of nuance with the definitions and how it's interpreted. So I guess if we went that route, I don't have a problem with having a second meter just allowed, but I would probably still have it only allowed for a detached ADU, maybe
So
not an internal one, because there's no reason that an internal one would need.
Right, that's
You can
true.
get a separate meter that's not an actual meter that will charge you
Right.
differently.
Give you the billing.
So add the word
Uh,
external to the, would you,
And I think
Or
you
detached.
leave the property must be built, property must be built for both meters,
Sure.
and that way it doesn't get used like it.
I'm comfortable with that if everyone agrees.
and both, you said in the report that both utilities are okay with this.
Yeah, he reached out to
Okay.
both of those
Let's
companies.
decrease the brain damage for you guys.
so is it going to be under the same address as 1 meter? So basically, under the same bill, there's no way for them to separate it to 2 separate billings?
Yeah, so that's actually in Nash's narrative. He does mention the utility companies have ways to add. I think one of them they add like his address and a half, and then the other one is his address plus B at the end to distinguish the 2 meters, because I think they do have to have the 2 separate addresses. For
I think the only concern that I do have with that is, in 50 years or 20 years, this is now sold. We now have the ability to see this and have it be shown as nearly a duplex. I mean, that's the same way that you bill as a landlord to, rent out to unit A and unit B.
And that's where the county affidavit would probably come into, because they would have that recorded affidavit stating that it's an accessory dwelling unit, but.
That is if it goes to an ADU versus a guest house. So if it is a guest house, you now have unit A and unit B. You've got house 1, you've got house 2.
But you
On
don't,
one
it's
parcel.
not an ADU then. If it's a guest house, it's not an
And it's
ADU.
still billed under the property owner.
Yeah,
And
if
in either
it's a guest
scenario, the
house-
property owner, the deed owner is the customer. It's not 2 separate customers. So I think that's kind of where it falls in. But I mean, at the end of the day, there's 2 families living on the lot. Like, we can get caught up in definitions and the nuance. And I mean, it does matter. to a degree, but there's things in place to make it so that if it were an issue where someone was using it illegally, we've got mechanisms to
And
enforce that.
wouldn't you have the same, whether it's part of the code or not, that there have to be all these hoops they have to jump through to have 2 meters or not, it still will say the same thing on the utility bill. I mean, the appearance is the same,
Right.
whether it's allowed in the code.
Absolutely, but I
Right.
think more from a land use standpoint, that's kind of where I'm looking at this, because this is a text amendment, not just for this site alone.
Right.
So the opportunity for multifamily abuse is what I'll say, is like, if somebody wants to do this to their ADUs or to their shed in the back and meter it, there's more opportunity to abuse it as a multifamily dwelling in a single family zone with allowing for 2 meters versus a single meter, where if it's a single meter in a single family home with a mother-in-law downstairs, you're basically doing a proportional chargeback for the utilities. With this, it's very easy to have, 2 separate families living in these homes. And I'm not saying that that's what the applicant's going for. These are just some of the repercussions that could potentially come from this, where single family zoning is now allowing for multifamily use. And it's easier to do it. And, multiple, typically you cannot get multiple meters on a single family home unless it's under a multifamily designation in adjacent cities, from my experience in that space. So I just want to make sure that we're putting, and I think the county affidavit might be the big factor here, is having the proper county affidavit that's associated with this type of use on the land use, I think will alleviate the risk of that.
Is an affidavit required for ADU
It
by
is.
the county?
Yeah, or I don't know, if
I
we
thought-
require.
I know
Our
Concord
code
Heights
requires it.
requires it, yeah, but I don't think
I
the
don't know.
county requires an affidavit
County
for
doesn't care.
ADU.
So, I mean, if we could do it for both guest houses, create an affidavit for a guest house and an ADU, I think I'd be more comfortable with that. Where for the use, if there's 2 separate meters in a guest house and a single family dwelling on the same parcel, there's an affidavit that they will be signing.
But I don't think we would allow 2 separate meters for a guest house.
So they're not sure if they're going guest house or ADU on this.
Chair, I would
Oh, I thought-
recommend
I
that we
think
move to adjourn and continue this discussion as part of our business session discussion.
I'll accept.
Second,
All in favor?